Welcome to the Jess Larsen Show on innovation and leadership. On this episode, I'm excited to have CEO of STEM, John Carrington. If you don't know STEM, you're going to learn all about him today. Pretty big success story out there. I just looked at the market cap, over $1 billion today. John, thanks for making time to do this.
Thank you, Jess. Good to be here.
So I want to talk more about your career history and how you got here, because you've got some pretty interesting things in there. But for people not familiar with STEM, can you tell us what you guys do and who your ideal customer is?
Sure. So we're the market leader in renewable software for the energy storage and solar asset performance management business. So effectively what we do is we provide a software, service, and a hardware to our global customer base that helps them drive lower energy cost and more performance out of their assets. And it's really driven off of a software platform that we've branded called Athena. And it's AI, although I am hesitant to use AI. We've been using it since we went public a few years ago. So it's core to our business, but it actually is out predicting energy costs based on our customers' activities, and it then utilizes battery storage to significantly reduce energy spend. And when I say significant, you're talking about 10 to 30% at your Fortune 500s, and then levering up returns upwards of 10 to 30% on solar facilities, as an example, where we would put batteries in conjunction with a solar plant. So we're really out helping customers save money on energy, improving project returns, which in the end really results in a more reliable and more sustainable electrical grid.
Yeah. I was listening to some of your other interviews, and you brought up some interesting points. Like, when somebody's thinking about a giant retailer like a Walmart, we think so much of like cost of goods, cost of labor to run the stores, real estate costs, things like this. But, you make the point of what a considerable aspect energy costs are to overall earnings. Can you talk about that a little?
Yeah, it really is. In many cases, the accounts payable from an energy standpoint is one of their largest one or two spends. And Walmart's a good case in point, right? They are a massive, probably top 3 energy user, literally behind like government. And they are a customer of ours, and their goal is certainly to save on their energy costs, like I mentioned. And if you take a 10 to 30% savings on energy at that scale, that's very significant to Doug, the CEO, and his team as it relates to performance for shareholders. So it's interesting. We really get an audience now at the C level because it's so material and can be. And really, with the latest Inflation Reduction Act that was announced by the current administration, you're now seeing where this pencils throughout the U.S., and particularly where there's been any solar. It's a good place for storage now to help them lever up those returns and even make it more beneficial both for the customer and the grid.
Yeah. Well, I'd love to talk more about STEM, but I kind of want to dive into your background a little first. So
Sure.
I'd love to hear a little more about growing up in Colorado and how you think that was an advantage for you as you've grown all these businesses so much over your career.
I don't know if Colorado was an advantage. I think.
I just mean like your family, like your experiences as a kid. Like,
Yeah.
how did you grow up help you with what you do now?
So I guess I would say I grew up primarily in Denver, as you mentioned, and probably one of those life-changing events. Parents were divorced at 10. My dad went to California. I stayed in Colorado. I was fortunate enough that he came out at least probably a week or a weekend anyway, a month. So we spent a fair amount of time together. And in the summers, I'd go work with him, and he happened to be in the software business. So I spent a lot of time around software, primarily in like middle school and even late high school, middle school and early high school, and with summer jobs and what have you. So it was very formable from that standpoint. But I think also just, a big focus around just business in general. I always had an affinity for it. My high school, Cherry Creek High School in Denver, had a business club called DECA. I think it's still around these days. And what was great about it is if you were an athlete, played any sport, you were required to be in DECA. With DECA, you were required to work. And I know that's a little unusual for some kids today, but I was mowing lawns, literally spray painting addresses on curbs. And so this paper route, as long as I can remember, I was working, and then it led into like restaurants and what have you. And I think along the way, you certainly get a work ethic that's compelling, but more so maybe you learn a type of people you don't want to become later. And hard work eliminates maybe some of those career choices. So I really, I think that was super compelling early on that the school forced everybody, if you will, that was an athlete to be in DECA. And, again, I continued to work in a variety of different things along the way. And certainly as I got out of school, I moved in a bunch of different areas within like General Electric as a case in point. But those early years were pretty formidable, I think, and why I'm where I am today.
Yeah, no kidding. Well, I'd love to talk about maybe some lessons you're using the rest of your career and growing STEM from previous experiences. I've heard you talk about being at GE for I want to say maybe 16 years and being part of a six executives Jeff Immelt picked to help spin off a business. I think you guys sold it for like 12 billion or something. Is that right? The plastic side.
Yeah, yeah. So we were. It was interesting. It was G Plastics, and it was one of these group businesses where it was probably the biggest customer base at GE, the highest matrixed business because we had 12 plus product lines and very global business. And at one time, I remember Jack Welch did a presentation where of the 12 CEOs, 10 of them in GE, 10 of them had come through plastics, including Bob Wright, who was CEO of NBC, which is not necessarily intuitive that he would have come through that route. So it was really an area where it cultivated a lot of leaders to different businesses within GE, and both Jack Welch and Immelt came through the plastics business. So I think that part of my career was super compelling. GE was an amazing business from the company, rather from the standpoint that they really trained executives, taught me a lot about diversity as well. They were on that, what is now DEI. They were involved in that, early 2000s. I remember as a senior executive, which I became at 34 years old, which was kind of deemed the top 500. I think there was 300 and some odd thousand employees. So it was a small group, but small percentage anyway. But the goal there was you had to participate in a lot of diversity things throughout the year, and there were different forums that took place, and you present or participate, and that was pretty interesting to me. I really had a chance to learn what diversity could do to drive and grow a business, and subsequently we've I think done a pretty good job of that at STEM. I was also assigned to Tokyo with GE and had Asia as my responsibility at the whopping old age of 34 years old, I guess. And so very good learning about all the different cultures and how to become a global business, global leader, and think in terms of all the different cultures. So that was an area that I really, I think was helpful in my career. Additionally, as you mentioned, I was one of 5 executives selected to sell the GE Plastics business, which we did for 12.5 billion. And that was really driven by, it was a raw materials based business. So the inputs we didn't have any control of. So we'd go to Fairfield, Connecticut corporate and deliver, several $1 billion of net income. The next year we'd lose $1 billion or $2 because the raw materials went the wrong way. And so you'd inevitably, be hiring 1,000, firing 1,000. So it was just a tough business in the portfolio. And eventually we had good meetings with Jeff Immelt, and he said, okay, I'm in. Let's go ahead and sell the business. And it was a great outcome for the company, and actually a very good outcome for the buyer, which was SABIC, a large Saudi company, actually the largest on the Saudi exchange, and all the way back to the wellhead. So it really helped them lower their costs from a raw material input. Following that, I was recruited to go to First Solar. That's where I got into the renewable side for the first time in my career, although I did do a little bit of it at GE. And really an amazing company. We grew that from, I don't know, about 200 million to a couple billion in about 18 months. I think it was a top 5 NASDAQ stock, and just very differentiated cost position technology at the right time, as always, as many times as the case. So really good run
Yeah.
there.
Well, I want to dive into these. So, for those of us who haven't been a part of a $12 billion divestiture, what's a lesson? What's something that you learned by doing it that you couldn't have learned any other way?
I think obviously the teamwork is always important, but I had a really strong team at the time. And just to paint the picture, so we had 5 strategics and 5 financials that were interested in buying the company, and we would do 8 hours a day with each of these. And because I had the sales and marketing piece, I got my unfair share of those times, and usually multiple follow-ups. But they'd come in with about 30 people, consultants and what have you. And so you had to have an exceptional amount of detail in everything about your business. As I mentioned, that plastics business is highly matrix. So you would have someone asking about how much medical business growth you're going to see in one of the products in China in the next 4 years. I mean, it was very intense, deep questions. And again, I would say having an exceptional team around me was great. Having the global experience I had as well was, I think, very beneficial, at least for me personally. So I don't think there's any one learning more than just the attention to detail, the depth of knowledge in your business, which was always really a foundation of a GE leader. It really had to be in the weeds and the details, and I think that has served me well, and probably any executive well, if you can kind of that take that line of objective as you run your business.
Yeah. Well, let's talk First Solar then. You said you came in kind of at the 200 million level and it got up to 2 billion.
Yeah, and still I don't even know where it is today, but continues to grow.
What's a lesson there? What's a $1 billion growth story lesson from that one?
Yeah, that was pretty amazing because here I go from, I think I had a couple thousand people at GE to, I don't know, maybe 60 at First Solar. And I remember hiring a new leader in Europe, and I said, well, where's my comms team to write the announcement? And they said, well, you go ahead and write the announcement. So going from that size company to First Solar, which, by the way, wasn't necessarily a small company, but significantly smaller, was a great learning. So, I mean, it was very insightful to see how many the resources you have at a big company versus now one that's significantly smaller but still reasonable in size. And I'd say that we were one of the biggest learnings for me there was once you got to a couple 100 million, we still had a lot of the same people that they started with zero, and the ability for them to scale into where we were going, the multiple billion, was not there. So I really had to change out the team. These were great people that got us to where we were, and many of them were maybe layered over or moved on. I mean, the stock was exceptional, and obviously people did very well. So, but the learning was for me was really to scale and hire for scalable, bigger people, and it served me well in STEM that we can talk to in a minute.
Well, I want to talk about this. I was having a conversation last month with a guy who'd been on the show, got kind of he's a founder, he's got the business to 500 million now. And we were just talking about all these different, folks on this show who have grown their businesses over the billion mark. And he was kind of asking me for insights from having done all these hundreds of interviews now, right? And this is a message he keeps hearing over and over of like, hey, what if the people who got you here can't get you there? But he thinks about them like family. Like he just loved these people so much. And he gets calls from private equity all the time trying to buy into his company, and he won't sell it because he's too concerned they'll treat his staff poorly, right?
Mm-hmm.
And he's very like, all CEOs love their teams, but I mean, he's really loves his team maybe more than others. And he's up against this crux of like, when he's really honest with himself, he's not sure some of his team are the right fit for the goal. For somebody for a founder CEO in that position, as they're trying to think of how to do right by the people who've done so much for them, but also balance that out with the recognition they may not be the right athletes for the next league up that they've qualified for.
Mm-hmm.
How would you help them through that kind of emotional aspects of that decision?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of things there. I mean, obviously we've all been there in this seat, and I would say that part of me looks at it, and there's kind of two paths. One is okay, you'll move on to another. You're kind of out of the company now. Most of those they've done very well at the business if it's been successful, and certainly in STEM's case, the executive team has done well. But I also think that if there's a chance to bring someone that's bigger that they can learn from, that's an avenue. But the other one is I think the employee knows they're not big enough for that role either as well. So I think having that candid discussion around, look, we're scaling into something that you haven't seen or been a part of, and how do you think about that? And there's still large equity owners likely, so I think it's a one-on-one discussion. I've had them before, people, and I think in the end they look back and go, you know what, I'm happier in the next chapter doing whatever they're doing, and the businesses continue to accelerate. And quite frankly, their team below them probably knows that manager's not the one that's going to get them to the next level, that likely the CEO is saying that that's where we need to go. So I get the loyalty, and I'm super loyal to my team, but you're also doing them a favor, I think, in many cases to say, hey, we got bigger things to do, and having the candid discussion around it.
Another thing I'm reading between the lines there, and I want you to tell me if you see it differently, but I wonder if a lot of times us CEOs are overthinking it without having the discussion. We assume everything that's going on. We assume how they're going to react, and maybe we discount some of our team's ability to recognize what you said. They probably realize they're
Mm-hmm.
not, they're not a 10 times growth kind of person.
Yeah.
And because we know our people who probably are, and we know our people who probably aren't, why do we think it's such a mystery to them? It probably
Mm-hmm.
isn't. And it's almost like have a little faith in your staff and just have that
Yeah.
candid conversation.
Oh, yeah.
Would you say it differently?
No, I wouldn't. I think it's right. And look, I mean, this has been an interesting one because, as I said before, people on this team everyone did very, very well in this outcome. Not that everybody sold every share they had, but it's been a good outcome. Several could say, I don't want to do this anymore. And they haven't. They're still in the game. They want to keep grinding. They think there's a way to make this significantly bigger than any of us ever imagined. I support that view. That's why I'm here. And I think that, but those others that you have those discussions with, I think it's the right one. You just have to be very open and candid. And look, I mean, I think at least in my case, my team has been with me for some time, and we've had, I mean, one involuntary departure. I mean, it's pretty remarkable in this environment to have a team that's that close. So it's a tight group, and I have no doubt a team member would come in and sit down and say, "Hey, I'm not the right fit right now." And we've had some of those discussions, and we've hired bigger people around them, and it's worked out for the best for the company, and equally important them.
Yeah. Well, I want to talk about STEM and thin film solar in a minute, but maybe just before we move on, what's one more success principle you would tell a high growth CEO of this, that 10 times growth, that $2 billion growth there for solar?
Yeah, look, I think the big key learning that I had at First Solar that I brought to STEM was hiring much bigger people than you need today. And that's not an easy sales pitch because when you're smaller, the bigger player may not want to come in, and you can't bring a bigger player in that says, I need 20 people under me because that's kind of what they've traditionally had if you're a smaller company. But here at STEM, I was that person. I came in. I literally was thinking I'll stay for a year. And of course that was December of 2012. So it's but I was very focused. Lars Johnson, our CTO, he was running Siemens Global Grid from a software perspective. I mean, it was a huge job, and he was coming into a team of maybe 15, 20 people, and he did it. And I can give you other examples on my team, but the ability to hire much bigger than you need today. And the reason it's important is I didn't have to do the first solar play that I did. I didn't have to do that same play that I did there at STEM. The people in the roles were big enough to take us not only to where we are today, but beyond. And that cohesive team, and to have that through all this journey is unbelievable. And it's a big, big part of why we're where we are today and why we'll continue to be successful, in my view.
Yeah. Well, coming off First Solar, can you talk about getting the call from John Doerr? And for people who don't know, can you talk about how big a name that is and what you decided to do next?
That's a great story, actually. So I was, several of us had left First Solar, and I was looking at some different things, and I got a call from John Doerr, who's with Kleiner Perkins, and rather legendary. Not rather, he is legendary, certainly in the VC world, and very early to Google, on the Google board, and many other success stories. And he's just an unbelievable individual for those of you who've been fortunate enough to know him. But I vividly remember the call because I was on the East Coast looking at different things, and it was probably the most humble voicemail you would ever imagine. He opened with, "I'm John Doerr of Kleiner Perkins, a venture capital firm, and the Bay Area, and I'd be very much appreciative you'd give me a call back to talk about an opportunity that I have in a portfolio company," and repeated, "This is John Doerr with Kleiner Perkins and the VC." But it was remarkable. Of course, I knew who he was, and I wish I kept it actually. But so I spoke with John, obviously, and it's pretty amazing. He's big on the family side of the equation as well. And so when I said I'd be interested in coming out, I interviewed. Then we kind of there was the old follow up with the board, and I said that my wife wanted to meet the board, and he loved it, and so we had a couples dinner before I was hired, which was great in Palo Alto, and everybody got to know one another. And then the next day, I went to Kleiner for the offer, and he asked where my wife was. And I said, back at the hotel, and he said, it's a family decision, bring her over. And we had a very interesting discussion around the family piece, the business side, and he was instrumental in helping us decide on the schools our kids ended up going to here in the area, and just was a remarkable individual. And that the company was Mia Soleil. The goal was really to sell the business. We needed a bigger partner. It was a SIGS-based solar company, which was kind of early stage, had probably too many employees. I think we were at 550, and I took that down to about 100. And we ended up selling it a little over a year after I got there. I stayed on for a few more months, and then, as I said, moved out of that onto STEM. But really good technology. I think just a little ahead of its time, and it's still in existence today under the new ownership. But it was a good learning as a first time CEO to have to go through that. It was growth, but we had too much burn, so we had to take a lot of that out, and then very focused on finding potential acquirers.
And was that transaction size disclosed, that sale?
I don't remember. I mean,
Okay,
yeah, I don't remember. You
don't
could
worry.
Google it certainly, but yeah.
So 9+ years ago, coming over to STEM for a year, how big was the business back then compared to now?
It's funny. It's framed in my office there. My first day, we had a slide up, and the post money valuation was $22.5 million. I think there were about 30 people in the business, and I remember telling one of the board members, "I don't know, I'm going to do the other 4 days of the week, but I'll help you for a year." And it was much more complex than I ever thought it would be, and it's been a great run. We've had a lot of fun, and obviously it's been challenging at times, but it was a great learning, probably the biggest learning of all the experiences I had. And here we are today, as you mentioned, a little over a billion. I think that's significantly lower than where it belongs, but we'll figure that out along the way. It's been a pretty rough market, particularly in this space, but we feel good about where the business is certainly, and the trajectory of the broader landscape and renewables.
Yeah, it's funny because looking at your market cap is like today was 1.15, right? So that 0.15, just the five is over double the original, but it's
Yeah,
like the rounding error we left off. It's a rounding error
yeah,
we left off, right? And
yeah.
so when you, well, here's one of my favorite questions to ask folks like yourself who've grown billion-dollar businesses. How do you define product market fit? A lot of people define it differently.
Yeah. So it's a great point, particularly because it's a fairly nascent market and early, there's a lot changing in the landscape. We would define it as, let me give you a little story of how we got there. So Rocky Mountain Institute is a group out of Aspen, Colorado, and they built this wheel of storage, they called it. It was all the things you could monetize within a storage use case, a battery storage use case at a solar plant, at a large building, at a Meta Facebook campus, wherever it was. And so we started building our apps, if you will, around those 13 use cases. And then we said, okay, as we're doing that, we're obviously pulsing customers to figure out what they deem to be appropriate. And by the way, in the energy space, each state is different as to which of those 13 you can monetize. So it's very complicated, and we won't go into all those details. But I would say that was helpful to us as we looked at what we needed to build out. Subsequently, it's changed in a variety of ways. And so I think, we are very voice of customer focused with a balance of what do we know about other markets that we could see going into another new market that we're not in today. So very customer focused, customer voice of customer focused rather. And I think, as I said, what traditionally we have built out. The good news is where we are today, there aren't a lot of new applications that we haven't built out. It's more, okay, here's 5 of them that will work of the 13 in Tokyo. And now we need to make a few adjustments, i.e., language, there's a voltage difference, etc. But in general, we kind of have not kind of, we do have the 13 of those in scope already. So we can kind of plug and play those apps to different markets to help our customers and STEM monetize on those.
Yeah. So with that backstory, you wouldn't have a product if people weren't buying it. But when you think about like this product market fit where it's so good, it's just magnetically attracting the kind of revenue that takes you from a $22 billion valuation to a $1.1 billion valuation. For founders who are saying like, I don't know if our product is good enough. I don't know if our service is good enough. Like, what's the test? How do they measure it? How do they know I've got a little more work or I've got a lot more work to have true product market fit?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that we really monitor is our repeat customer contracts, and we do this on our earnings calls. And we're well over 50% on that metric, and that to me is a big one, right? If your say-do ratio is so good that they want to come back, you're delighting, exceeding their expectations, they will come back. So that to us, that's been the biggest metric we've watched is are they repeat buyers? And at like these large Fortune 500s, we'll do an MSA, a master service agreement in Bentonville. And when Walmart says we want to open 50 stores in Iowa, we'll get that call, right? So I think those are some of the things that we watch early on. It's hard, it's about customer adoption. It's about, hey, the feedback that we're getting from them, staying very close. We're kind of beyond that because we've built it out. But early days, it was really a lot of hand holding and voice of customer back and forth on how the product's working. But it's not a straight line. We were fortunate to have this Rocky Mountain Institute wheel as kind of the North Star, if you will, because they had done a lot of work around it. And this was early on in the company's history and turned out to be a very solid roadmap for us to use.
Yeah. Think about this idea of delighting the customer, exceeding expectations. I don't know any CEOs who think our service is just mediocre. Like we've got okay customer service. Like everybody thinks they're great. And then you've got those folks who do exceed expectations so much that they have just the incredible growth that you guys have had. If you were going to give advice for a CEO of how to increase a culture of exceeding expectations, like what do they need to be doing repeatedly? How does that work to get that through a whole company, that this is just how work is done around here?
Yeah, look, my view is a couple of things. Number one is I think you have to measure it because you get what you measure, and I would incentivize it. So when I got here, we created our core values. Then we said, okay, we're going to do OKRs and tie that very metric in if it's important to you and pay people on it. I mean, we do an NPS score. We monitor every quarter. We're very diligent around our customer service. The solar asset management piece has a lot of incoming on that front, and we watch that metric regularly. And again, you get what you measure, and I think if you put some economics around it for your team, you'll get even more of what you're looking for.
It's funny, doing a net promoter score, it sounds so simple, and yet how many of us aren't doing it? It's not knowing what to do, right? It's
Yeah.
actually doing it.
It's powerful. I mean, I'd recommend anybody listening to institute it, and we've had a lot of success, particularly with our Boulder operations, because that's where the customer center primarily is for the incoming around solar, and it's powerful. We did it at GE 20 years ago.
Yeah. What's another billion-dollar success principle you'd share with founders?
Look, I think it depends on the stage of your company, but let's say they're still private. I cannot, and I always say this to CEOs that are in the situation, is I cannot emphasize enough how important your early investors are to your success. And it doesn't matter if they're on the board or a board observer, discount that. Make sure it's a good fit for you, your goals, your team, because that was an interesting learning for me. We had a very diverse group of investors, right? So I raised a fair amount of money when I arrived, and the horizons were very different. Some had 2 or 3 years left in the fund, and they were like, "Okay, let's monetize this." Others were like, "Hey, this is incredible growth opportunity. We're going to ride this out. And that mixed group creates some friction for the CEO, creates friction for the board. So I would say being very thoughtful about that is a key priority that they should consider. And I would encourage them to have other board members spend time with those investors to make sure that that works. Don't just take any money, I guess, is the message. And if you can be thoughtful about the board and the composition of your investors, that will eliminate a lot of problems.
Let's get a little more granular on that for a minute. Thinking about the actual fundraising conversation, you've gone through this process. You've come to a conclusion like this would be a great long-term business partner for us to have these folks as an investor. When it comes down to like the actual meetings, what kind of principles do you have to share with us on like how to help those meetings turn into actually closing this partnership and them investing?
Well, I mean, look, I think there's two things related to that. One is, are they are they accretive to your growth? That was kind of my biggest piece of it. And then are they accretive to your, can they do anything strategically to help you? So they're both kind of growth related, but one strategy is on the, hey, is there, whether it's regulatory, whether it's recruiting, whether it's government relations, whatever it might be, are they accretive to that? But the other one is, really, are they the right business partner? Can they help you grow in a way that they're actually going to commit to? I'll give you an example. One of our investors came and said, look, here's our target area in the country. We want to utilize STEM in these areas. We'll put it through our sales channel. There'll be zero cost to serve for you. There'll be more feet on the ground. And it was a very successful program for the business. So that kind of thinking. And by the way, they said we're going to have one venture partner specifically focused on STEM internal to the company. It's a very large utility on the East Coast. And he was running around talking to all the different businesses to help get STEM integrated in their sales force. That kind of thinking and that kind of discussion turned into a tremendous relationship versus, early on before I got here, a small VC that came in that can be as noisy as the bigger investors, which isn't helpful for the CEO or the other investors for that matter, that don't provide that value. So I think that's the balance. It's really around, can they be a long-term partner? Do they have examples of that? And then can they help you strategically? And I'll give you a good example. So John Doerr, we talked about earlier, when I was at Mia Soleil as the CEO, we needed some help with some deals down in India. And a lot of it was going through some government agencies in DC. And it was kind of one call to introduce me to the right people. We had to go sell it. We had to go get it done. But to get to that level from a board member right away was very powerful. And it helped us, accelerate our business internationally, which helped from a sales standpoint as well. But those types of things, those type of individuals on your board, I think are key. And if you can get them, grab them as quickly as you can.
Yeah. So once you've decided you like them, what's a technique, what's a principle, what's a mindset for getting them to decide that they fully want to commit to you back and actually stroke those checks?
Yeah, at least for our case, a lot of it was credibility on our, what we said we were going to do from a financial standpoint. We did. We could share old board decks with them. I think there's a high level of credibility with this team, and it goes back to what I said before. This wasn't, two guys in a pickup truck. This company, right? We had senior executives that have done a lot of bigger things before, and I think that provided a ton of credibility with investors and gave them the comfort to move forward.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about some of those financial results. When you think about landing large enterprise accounts, and you think about how you're going to guide your biz dev team, your sales team to do over $1 billion of growth, what are you trying to instill in them?
Well, it's changed, right? Originally, it was growth at all costs, not really, but growth. And, the market's really changed to growth's great, but you need to be profitable. And look, we had always said we were going to be, all of our roadshow documents as part of our public offering had that. So that's not a surprise. But I'd say the biggest focus now is really around gross margins in the 15 to 20% range, which is what we've guided to the street. Top line growth continues to be very strong, but we want to make sure we're doing it with the right margin, exposure. And so I think the gross margin piece has been the biggest focus for us in the business, much more so than it had been in the past. And the team's aligned around it. And again, back to you get what you measure. We're paying our sales team on gross margin. So they're highly incentivized to sell at the highest gross margin dollars they can get.
Again, such simplicity, right?
Yeah.
You want margin? Why do you incentivize the people in your
Yeah.
team who are the most swayed? I say this as a lifelong sales guy. I got my first sales job at 15. Even as founder of my own little investment funds, I still feel like I'm top
Right.
sales guy, right? The people most likely to sway what they do based on incentive, they're going to do what you pay for. So why don't you
Yeah.
pay for what you want?
Absolutely.
So simple, yet I can count on one hand the number of people who've told me, oh yeah, we pay on margin instead of pay on gross.
Mm-hmm.
Isn't that what your company's looking for? Why doesn't everybody? I mean, I
I
get
know.
that there's certain times that may or may not make sense, but I
Yeah.
gotta say, for most people who are actually trying to make money, that is such a simple but powerful idea that I don't hear very often.
Yeah. No, it's funny because I'll also say I want the highest compensated person in this company to be a salesperson. By all means, I want that bonus check for them to be the number one of anybody in the company beyond the CEO or anybody else, because that says we did a great job and that individual did a great job and drove a ton of margin into this place.
I'm interested to hear your thoughts. There's so many stories of basically CEO jealousy of sales reps are making more than me. That doesn't make sense. Let's adjust their compensation down. And then they lose their best reps. Why do you think that is something that has happened over and over and over across business in this country?
Yeah, I think, we've been pretty thoughtful about we're going to compensate for gross margin. And, we want to drive more software. That's higher margin. The Athena platform, super compelling. And so they're laser focused on doing that. I don't know why you'd want to pay reps less. I think some CEOs get caught into wow, there's a check for 800 grand for somebody that year, and I think that could be a little bit of a shock to the system. But the reality is that they probably could go get that same amount somewhere else at a competitor, or possibly more. So I don't think it's a great idea to start clipping the commissions, but I do think it's vitally important to tie it to your OKRs. Like I said, software for us first and foremost. Hardware, it's kind of a necessary evil, if you will, because our customers want both today. Longer term, I see Athena orchestrating a variety of different renewables out in the market. And, with our ability to kind of land and expand on all those 13 value props that I mentioned, there's a long tail to this business that is super compelling for sales reps, and they can get paid on that. So I think that being thoughtful about the comp plan, and we spent a lot of time on it, and aligning it with your goals sounds basic, but there's a lot of misalignment in a lot of companies that I see.
Yeah. We had Fred Casera on the show. Fred Vicola, who grew Casera to like 22 billion. And he talked about at a certain level, thinking about sales like a revenue acquisition factory. Does that concept work for you, or do you think about it differently?
I'd say gross margin factory, but similar thinking.
Yeah.
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 we
No, I
were a
like it.
revenue factory before, but yeah, I want to make sure we're making money with it. But yeah,
Yeah.
there's certainly that makes sense.
Yeah. Oh, these are great. Let's go for another. What's another billion-dollar growth principle?
Look, we've talked about the team. We've talked about the board and that how important that is. I think the other one that you got to be careful on, and we have been pretty prudent around, is just managing your growth. I think a lot of companies, when they get started, will go for the press release, open a new market, and at a high cost. I mean, it's hard to go open new markets outside of your home market, and I think a lot of companies get caught in this trap of planting their corporate flag somewhere just to say they have a new market and not understanding the real cost of that. In case in point for us, we had 75% market share in the state of California for energy storage. Okay, for behind the meter, it's called, which is called your corporates. and industrial type companies. Every investor would say to us that was coming in, "Oh, you're a California business. You got to get bigger. You got to go broader." And this market was so big, it was the biggest in the country. We had that level of share. So I really stuck to our knitting in California, and it paid off. We subsequently obviously went to other markets, but had I done that early on, I think it would have cost us market share at our home market. We'd have burned a lot more cash trying to address 5 or 6 different states. And so I think being thoughtful about your growth strategy is a big, big part of being successful, particularly early stage, because it's so easy to just, it's like the kids at the soccer game, right? The little one all run to the ball, the shiny object. We really tried to not do that. And really one of the big reasons why we didn't is we had a BD team that looked at, hey, what are the markets? What are the injections that we have to make those markets work? And how compelling are they? So we were very thoughtful about that kind of multi-market kind of generation plan, if you will, of going into those new locations. And international is another trap. I mean, we were very slow to do that. I did it in Japan with Mitsui. They were an investor. They helped us. They had the knowledge, the influence, and the team to help get us into Tokyo, as an example. And we were the first storage assets on the ground. We actually brought Tesla to Japan with us, and those assets are still there and up and running. So I think you just got to be very careful on that trap. And we were, and I think it served us well.
You think about that kind of discipline, and, chasing the shiny object's a great example, right? You hear quotes from Warren Buffett say, like, if I have mediocre performance at home, what makes me think if I go 5,000 miles away, all of a sudden I'll become a genius,
Mm-hmm.
And
Exactly.
you think about like Jeffrey Moore and crossing the chasm of like, hey, why don't you nail one vertical before you go try and boil the ocean? And what's interesting about your story, though, is I'd never thought about a geography as the vertical, and this idea of, look at that power of such market share in such a significant geography and the lessons you've got for that as you approach the next ones. And when you think about discipline as a founder or a CEO, to not go after what feels like easy money elsewhere and stay home until you've knocked this domino over before you go for the next domino, what would you say to folks as they're trying to choose that discipline?
Yeah, I mean, again, for us, it was this. I mean, market size certainly, product fit was certainly another one, and cost to serve. I mean, that's the trap. People, I did a lot of international expansion, whether it was GE or First Solar, and it's so much more expensive than you think. And if you're going at it alone, it's really daunting. So I think those are some of the key principles. And, for us, we really looked at what was successful in California: best software platform, best hardware platform, a lot of institutional knowledge on various customers. And did that play well into other markets or not? And when it did, and there was a go to market strategy that was compelling, that still kind of held up the margin threshold that we had, which again, back in the early days was lower than now, then we pulled that trigger. But we were, like I said, we were very thoughtful about it, and still are today. I mean, we have a global team. We have people in India, we have people in Berlin that handle Europe, and we want to make sure that we're EBITDA positive in the second half. We've made that commitment, and you do that by being disciplined, as you said. And I think there's a lot of simplification in this business that we're trying to drive as well. So it's not overly complicated to drive that throughput.
Yeah, it's such an interesting concept. At Greystoke Networks, we make podcasts like mine for other CEOs, where we go do the work to find them all the high-profile guests, right? So one of our clients, I was having a conversation kind of like this last month, where he built a $100 million business very quickly within a couple of years, and then started a number of different product lines and a couple of other businesses. And he was just saying to me last month, going like, why am I doing this? Why am I adding all this complexity? Like, I've got a $100 million business in an $11 billion a year market. Like, why don't I just stay home? Why don't I stay home and 10 times this business? Like, why am I starting 10 other businesses? Like, why am I chasing that complexity? Like, he's like, I'm changing my mind. Like, we're going back to our knitting. We're doubling down on what's working so well, rather than kind of like you said, chasing shiny objects.
I agree with that.
So you've accomplished things that a lot of other people haven't. What do you think is different about you?
I think we touched on some of that earlier on. I mean, I was always had a high work ethic was very high for me. I think, look, you get lucky too. I mean, there's a timing piece. There's getting the right team in place is massive to the output of this. I mean, I easily could have not hired the right people um, and not be sitting here talking to you today. I mean, there was a lot of things that broke our way, and I would never sit here and say, oh, it was all Carrington, because it wasn't. It was this whole staff that's here today. Our investors helped get us here today. So I don't think there's a silver bullet. It's I think anybody that would take credit for doing it individually, I would short that stock in the morning. But it's a team effort, and it has been a great journey. And we're fortunate to be where we are. We had good tailwind in the market. We had a very good product, and still do, obviously. But the early software platform that was built here was very compelling, and then to build off of that was important. We've had third-party research. We've been identified by AI Breakthrough and others just in the last couple of months, even, that it really is groundbreaking and industry leading software platform in Athena. And that goes a long way. I mean, that helps propel a lot of momentum when you have a product of that caliber, and it's recognized as such by the market.
Yeah. By the way, what's the URL if people want to learn more about the business, and where's the best place to follow you? LinkedIn or where's good?
Yeah, I'm on LinkedIn. I think the www.stem.com is everything there. We have all of our investor presentations are up, as well as videos on the company, etc. But that's a good place to start. And we continue to expand the business, grow. We're hiring, software developers and other areas of the business. And if there's an interest, there's ways on the site itself to connect with us. And we're always up for talking to new great talent.
Yeah. Well, I kind of want to go back to your last answer, and I think that's a very humble answer, and it's a very accurate answer to say, like, hey, this song took a whole orchestra. The team members, the investors, everyone. But I mean, you as the orchestra conductor there, as a CEO, have accomplished what a lot of other CEOs haven't done. When you think about something that's different about you, when you think about something you've doubled down on, what do you think that is?
I don't know if it's different, but I will tell you the pain that I instilled when I first got here was around being very defined on metrics and what they're going to deliver. And it was so uncomfortable that I ran a lot of people out of the company. And it was very much a GE process that I instilled when I got here. I still think there are a lot of companies that are pretty loose early on because look, it's pretty easy for a software developer to go down and have a cup of coffee in San Francisco and talk about what the art of this product could be. I'd rather have them spend a lot more time building it than kind of dreaming. And I felt like there were a lot of dreamers, and we fixed that through measuring them, holding people accountable, and consequences for misses. And I think that is a little different, at least what it felt like to me when I got out to California, than it maybe been with other businesses. GE is a pretty rough place, right? I got promoted to corporate, and one of the head HR people said, "Bring a helmet," and but it was great learning. And I think it's a pretty basic thing to hold people accountable for what they say they're going to do, and there should be consequences if they miss, all the way up to this chair, right? So it's a culture I instilled, and I think it's served us well. And that, to me, it felt different because my investors loved it, my team that I brought in loved it, and there was a lot of friction when I first started it. So I know it wasn't comfortable for a lot of people. They went on and did other things, and we ended up with people that executed on our vision.
Why do you think consequences are so much less common in businesses these days than maybe at other times? Why?
Well, look, I think part of it was you had a very tight labor market, right? So, your C player might turn into a D player if you go out to the market because there just weren't that many people. That dynamic has changed. I think it's a tighter labor market, but I don't know. I mean, I really don't. I think, and look, I'm not draconian running around. We should fire people on the spot. I think it's a very healthy environment and culture at STEM, and we have values that we focus on, and we're very thoughtful around that. An incredible HR team, but I think that it was different. When I was at GE, certainly I don't know if that was right or wrong, but to me, it's pretty straightforward. You live up to your commitments, and at least around here, then if you don't, then help. We'll try to help you get better, and if you can't and can't execute, then we have to find somebody that can, because we're accountable for those deliverables to our investors and the board. And you get well recognized either side of that. So
Yeah, I love it. Well, listen, I appreciate you making so much time for us today.
thank you, Jess. Good to spend time with you, and appreciate the opportunity to talk a little bit about STEM and the global leadership position we have in analytics and storage and solar.
It's great. Thanks everybody for listening.